begin by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all join us from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and their ongoing connections to the lands and waters of our country.
Implement the ambitious policies and practices which prevent the harmful effects of climate change, to secure the living conditions of all living things as promised in the Paris Climate Change Agreement and outlined in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I contributed the part on climate change in the book. You may have put that together. And I run a leadership development practice out of Melbourne, Australia. I am also a climate reality leader. And I trained with Al Gore in Brisbane in 2019. So I worked actually with Jen on some of Brene Brown's Dare to Lead curriculum. I'm a facilitator, I'm a certified facilitator in the Dare to Lead curriculum and the Daring Greatly and Rising Strong curriculum. And my remit actually at this stage in my career, having left a 20-year digital marketing, digital strategy career, making the leap into my own business, is really to equip leaders with the skills to have courageous conversations, to really face the realities of the changes that are put before us, and to raise their own level of self-awareness about how comfortable they are in rumbling with their own vulnerability to take on uncomfortable conversations. Because we need braver leaders at every level, in every organisation, across every industry globally, to really step up to face the realities that we have in front of us. So thanks for having me, Jen, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Kylie, and thanks for that reminder about the vulnerability of our land and waters, which impact not just Australia, of course, but all around the globe. So great timely reminder. Thank you. Now we're going to move to Yvonne Ruke Akpoveta, who joins us from Canada. Yvonne.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Lena, and hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me here. So I'm here in Toronto, Canada, Greater Toronto, Canada. First of all, a big congratulations to you, Dr. Jen, on this book. This is a fantastic book and subject to have. This is an area that I'm hugely passionate about, change leadership. So for you to have this book and, setting the way and blazing a trail is awesome. Love it. I'm a change management strategist. I have been working as a change management for the last 15 years. Over the last 20 years, been doing a lot in projects. So my career started out as always in a project environment, be it as a business analyst, then a project manager, management consultant, always doing change, which is an area I'm very passionate about. And in my passion around change management, one of the things that I discovered the importance of was change leadership. Change leadership as a skill, not just for the leaders at the top, or I don't even like to say leaders at the top, but not just for executives and management at the top, but for everybody across every strata or every level within the organization. I found that when projects failed or succeeded, it always came down to leadership as a skill. But what was so much more important was seeing the value of the ability to lead and drive change be something that can impact employee mental well-being in the workplace. It can impact communities at large, and it can impact economies. And and that's become so much more apparent now in the pandemic, because where I thought change leadership was a big thing before, I've realized that change leadership and being a change leader is a matter of life and death. We've seen the impact of leaders in quotes, or even high up authority, where by not making the right decisions or timely decisions or acting in a certain way, it is now a matter of life or death. When it comes to the ability to be change leaders, it affects, our lives, our economy, and everything. I'm a big change leadership advocate. Even before the pandemic, one of the big things was seeing the disruption that was happening, even from AI, robotics, technology, fourth industrial revolution. And it took me back to my own career when I first started out in the dot-com boom, and mergers and acquisitions, and organizations not being prepared for the change as leaders led to unemployment. I got made redundant. So even from a personal career perspective, it's very important that we're responding to the changes around us. And, so from there, that was where my change leadership advocacy also started. So I'm a founder of the Change Leadership Conference. We've been doing it for 5 years. I see someone like Gail. Gail was one of our first speakers at the Change Leadership Conference, and, very big advocate around getting organizations to respond better and faster to the disruption that is happening around us. So to be here is just humbling and an honor. So thank you for having me, and great to see so many faces and great to have this discussion. Thank you so much, Lena. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Yvonne, and for bringing up the importance of change leadership, not just in times when things are going along quite nicely, but particularly in times of crisis, and how the impact that one or more decisions can actually make with or without those insights. So that's great. Now, finally, we're going to move to Luc Galoppin, who is based in Belgium. So you're the night owl because it is past the midnight hour in your part of the world. So welcome, Luc.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Jen. It's a real honor to be on your panel. And I'm really excited to be holding a physical copy of the book, and reading it is a special occasion because reading something that somebody has written that you personally know, so the pattern of thinking, the being of that person, what are the weak spots of that person. It's really a nice experience to read this. And maybe a little background about myself. I've been a change practitioner for about 20 years now, solo practitioner. And like many of you, I started out in a project environment, now doing some fun stuff with leadership teams. And along the way, I've had the opportunity to work with neighborhoods. So I've been doing some ABCD, which stands for Asset-Based Community Development. And that's a whole different thing than organizations, because there you work with citizens, with residents, and they're not on a payroll. You cannot coerce them into something. And it's a different set of leadership skills that you need there. So that's a little bit my background. I'm fascinated by two things mostly. That's community development. And the second thing is the self as an instrument. And I like to dive deep into the different aspects of the self, which is why this book, when I first started reading it, I thought, well, this is going to be a nice upgrade on the latest things I need to know. But then, heck, there's these action points, and all of a sudden, when you read those change actions, all of a sudden it gets under your skin. And then I started cursing to myself and saying, well, why does she open all these boxes? So now I have to think and rethink all these things about myself. So when I first thought this is going to be a light read, and I think we will come back to that in the discussion, it was not such a pleasant read in the end, because it made me reflect things about myself, whereas I thought this is going to be just a fun read. But anyway, that's a small introduction about myself and the way I look at things. Back to you, Lena. And you're on mute.
Just realized that a minute too late. Thank you, Luc. And thank you all for sharing your stories with us. Now, I'm going to put a question to the panel members to really kick off the conversation, and this will start to warm up the audience to invite them to start asking the panel questions as well. And this will help us understand how change leadership has been impacted by the recent events of the last 12 months. So the first question I'll pose, and I'll start with you, Jen, so you can you can kick it off, is what did we learn about leadership in 2020?
Muted at my own book launch. I mean, seriously. I think that we learnt a lot. I think the learning was really uncomfortable for a lot of us, in that a lot of leaders were caught napping, you know, and for anybody who has done work in leadership training or programs for leaders, often it feels like, you know, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think by the end of last year, we had a lot of thirsty horses out there. Now, those leaders who had invested in professional development and staying at the frontier of things that were going, they did exceptionally well. And we saw some amazing proof points of, you know, that investment in, you know, how do they lead change, but what are the future of leadership really paid off in spades for them. So that's my take on it.
So much, Jen. Getting better at the unmute myself now to do that like on speed dial. Thanks, Jen. I'm going to open now that question to the panel. What did we learn about leadership in 2020? Anyone can go first. Who'd like to kick that off as well?
I'll go ahead and jump in, Lena. Thank you. So
thanks.
Just in partnership with everything that Jen said, I think one of the things we also learned is that leadership is more rare than we thought, right? True leadership as a capability. The reality of it is a lot of organizations, a lot of people were caught off guard because I think there still continues to be an assumption that leadership and management are the same muscle. And the reality of it is they are two different capabilities. And so I think a lot of organizations found out that they had people that were great at managing processes. There was an inclination to manage people that they could see, that they could touch, and they could put their arms around and use that to determine whether or not people were able to be productive. And the reality of it is leadership is much more scarce. We know that there are people that struggled with building engagement with their teams, with people as human beings. And that showed up very, very quickly. I think, as you mentioned, Jen, organizations that had invested in not just training the right people, but picking the right people to lead were set up for success. Those people understood how to work with their teams, how to engage, how to enhance and deepen relationships, even virtually. Organizations that had probably more managers who now had workforces that were distributed, that were globally dispersed, were having to find ways to now quantify productivity or effectiveness. And in many instances, did not have deep and enriching relationships with the people that they were supposed to be leading. And I think that told on a lot of organizations very, very quickly. The other thing I think that we also learned is that, you know what, leaders burned out, right? It was requiring a level of engagement and consistency and being tuned in and being connected and troubleshooting. And what quickly I think also rose to the surface is how little empowerment our leaders have to make decisions for their teams at the ground level. And so you had some people that were stymied or did not have the ability to make real-time effective decisions for the people in their charge. And that created, I think, a lot of inertia, right, in the system and across organizations. And so, you know, some leaders were caught unaware, some were uninformed or unskilled, and some were simply unprepared.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Oneka. Who else would like to address the really important question, what did we learn about leadership in 2020?
I have an observation. Once that people got back to their homes and that the only connection was the virtual connection, what we saw immediately was the difference between people who were grounded and who were not grounded. And immediately I could see that leaders who were grounded were not necessarily the people who were up in the hierarchy, but were people who were connected horizontally with their teams and who had the personal skills and the personal maturity developed within themselves to connect with people and to connect people. So that became painfully visible because some people up in the ladder of hierarchy, of whom we naturally would have expected to hold that maturity, they were bare naked in this new virtual reality. And that was a painful observation for those people. So basically everything Oneka said, I second that, yes.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Luc. So the informal leaders and the informal influencers, and we have a question about that, which I'll bring up later when we open it up to the audience too. Kylie or Yvonne?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I was getting a lot of speaking requests during that time for leadership development on values and trust. And they were the things that seemed to have been really emergent in that space. It was around really digging into our values. What do our values look like in this landscape? How do we translate those values-based behaviours in a distributed virtual online environment? And what does trust look like when we can't physically be in the same space with each other, when we're on a Zoom call for an hour, but we don't know what else is happening outside of that, and we know that there's a lot of other juggling. And so those two elements, investing in not only just leadership capacity, but team awareness of those two things in particular, were things that I was getting feedback on around a real need in organisations. And the other thing that I noticed was just how capable we are of change when we really push to the wall to do it. So the speed of change, and I think about in Australia in particular, when we moved to telehealth, and I have a friend of mine who has a psychology practice, and she was advocating, with her whole industry around getting telehealth on our Medicare a system, and that had a roadmap for something like 10 years time that was looking at being invested in. And when push came to shove, and when there was the need, and when there was the political will, they turned that around in literally 2 weeks. And so for me, in terms of of what are we actually truly capable of when we are very clear about what's important, what are our values, what's the need, and where is where is the political will? Those things really came to the front in terms of my experience of what I saw happen with leadership.
Wow, really good points. Yes, when the environment has shifted so fast, how we can also do the same. I think we underestimate our ability to do that. Totally. Thanks so much, Kylie. Yvonne, let's hear from you before we throw it open to the rest of the group.
Yeah, I heard so many great things, and I'll try not to repeat anything that has been said. But picking up from what Kylie said, definitely the speed at which change could happen, the speed at which, the speed created that open-mindedness of people to know that nothing is immovable. It shifted leaders' minds to say they can no longer be compliant, or people who lead organizations, or people across the organization. It definitely created a shift in mindset and the importance of leadership. But for me, what I did during that time, when I would listen to the leaders or the leaders or the folks or the in authority, the political people, the prime ministers, whether of Ontario or of Canada, when I would listen to them speak, I would be taking notes, because I was really looking at their change leadership skills. I was looking at their leadership skills. I was looking at what they were doing right, what they could do better. I was looking at the case studies of the future, really. I was looking at how empathy played a very big role, like, for instance, at the beginning of our pandemic, our prime minister for Canada, his ratings were going high and high and high. And it was just because he was showing empathy for people. It made a whole difference. And then for the prime minister, for instance, of Ontario, because he showed a lot of empathy, is what is interesting. And Gil, maybe we can have a chat about this later. For his empathy level, his ratings went high at first, Then when he stopped showing empathy, his rating started to come really down, kind of thing. So it really showed the value of empathy, and empathy became such a strong word in the leadership circles, and it shifted leaders' mindsets again. So there was a big shift, in mindset during with the whole pandemic, to really start to value those skills such as emotional intelligence, empathy, those things that seem intangible before, to start to see how important it was. That big shift was very important to me. And even skills such as communication, how communication can be a matter of life and death, or even like decision making. It just felt to me the value of leadership became so much more apparent during the last year, that, it was no longer a discussion that people should be having on whether we should train leaders, or, who should be responsible, whether leadership was the responsibility for people at the top or whether across the organization. The pandemic and the whole last year just really brought everything to light, where, it kind of like accelerated the future of work. And one of the things about the future of work is like saying that leadership skills are one of the amongst the top 10 skills of the future that people need to be part of. So now it just became so much more apparent, because all of the technology that people were being hesitant on, that we as change strategists or change folks are like, well, how do we introduce this to people? Or we were tippy-toeing how we'd introduce AI and bots and all of these technologies. And then the pandemic just opened that Pandora's box, and they just implemented all of the technologies. Future of work became a noun thing, and then now leadership became a must-have for everybody. So I could go on about that, but for me, that was some of the things that came to light for me, and it was so much interesting and so much more. But I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. It certainly put leadership as a quality and attribute on world stage, didn't it? As we saw how different leadership styles played out and the impact of them in the last year. So if anyone wasn't interested in leadership before 2020, they should be now, because the world is now rich with so many case studies. So we've heard some fantastic responses from our panel. Just before I open up full range of questions to the group, there was a question that came through a little earlier that I'm going to throw to the panel that I can see in the chat panel, and it's from Melinda Coyne, and it says, hey Jen, although this question I assume could be for anyone, I assume you don't have to be a formal senior leader or lead a team, but these changes can be adopted by anyone, as we all have personal leadership, and it's got a question mark on it. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that for Melinda, and then we can open up.
Cool. I'll kick off first on that one. So Melinda, thank you for the question. The book was explicitly written for formal leaders in organizations. And the reason why was, if we think about what is the pivot point, the lever for the greatest impact, if we improve some part of the system, for me, it felt like that was it, that if we could see a 10% improvement in our leaders across multiple areas, you would have massive system effects in it. Now, to your point, we all have, or many of us have, leadership roles in different domains. So whether it be community or within our family or within our peer friendship groups. And so, yes, there absolutely are lessons for us in out of the book in terms of if we want to be intentional around our role in leading change in areas outside of the organisation. So that would be my response on that.
Great, thanks, Jen. Now I'm going to give the audience two options, so a bit of autonomy for you. You could put your hand up and bring yourself off mute to ask a question, or you can pop it in the chat panel if you'd rather pop it in there and I can read it out. So if you've got any questions or comments, or you want to tag a particular panel member with a question because you want to follow up on their comments. Now, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, there was a question from Natalie about...
Okay, sorry, there was too, yes.
That's okay. Yes. So who believes it's possible to coach or teach empathy?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah.
And have you seen this done well?
I'd like to answer that
one. That's an interesting one. I can take that. And why I find it interesting, we had this conversation in Clubhouse. You know, we have this change management rooms and club. We discuss things, and empathy is a topic we've been discussing in the last 2 weeks. And empathy is something that can definitely be learned. I think we're learning every day. Because you become more sensitive to people. It's because sometimes, you know, you come from an environment that may lack empathy. Sometimes you even think you have empathy and you don't have empathy. So empathy is something that even, you know, bringing in a whole new dimension, you know, one of the things we've spoken about, and I'm saying is that even with teaching on diversity and biases and unconscious bias even opens you up more to empathy, because sometimes you might feel, oh yes, I'm empathetic, like, yeah, I'm an empath, yes, I know this, but sometimes we even have unconscious bias. So the more we learn, the more we become aware, the more we become more, we're more able to become somewhat of an empath or have more empathy. Because with empathy too, there are different types of empathy. You know, you have your the emotional one, cognitive empathy, compassionate empathy. Again, we're all learning what is the right type of empathy to apply to the workplace versus the right type of empathy to apply to maybe community or your home life. So the short answer to that is empathy is definitely something that can be learned. I've become more empathetic, you know, during the pandemic than I initially was, you know, because before, to me, like A, B, C, D, yes, I'm big on empathy, and unfortunately, I'm an empath. The reason I say unfortunately, because sometimes it can be really hard, especially when you're watching the news all the time and you're opening yourselves to different things. So that's why it's also important for us to learn cognitive empathy, you know, to be able to put it in boxes and silos and, you know, really work with it, especially as change leaders. We have to learn empathy, but we also have to learn to apply empathy, because empathy can also be a bad thing when not properly applied. So it's a learning journey, I would say.
Great. Thanks.
Can I just jump in there as well? So in the Dare to Lead curriculum, which was created by Brene Brown, and she's a social worker by training. Social workers are taught empathy. So it's a rigorous skill set. There's a whole academic body of research behind what empathy skills look like. If you speak to social workers, and it thrills me no end to see a social worker like Brene Brown now speaking in management and leadership circles and bringing those skills of what it looks like to bring people along with you. What does it look like to create psychological safety? What does it look like to to bring that to community at different levels? And so, you know, when we talk about empathy in the Dare to Lead training, we talk about it as a rigorous skill set with sort of five skills of, you know, being able to stay out of judgment, about perspective taking, about recognizing emotion, being able to communicate emotion, and about mindfulness. So it absolutely is a rigorous skill set, and social workers will tell you that it is extremely uncomfortable, that it feels awkward and strange to kind of practice empathy at the very beginning, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think it's a key skill that we have. And one of the quotes that I actually put in the book around being able to tackle climate change was about, do we have the capacity as a global population to reach critical empathy in order to be able to address the changes in front of us, by Jeremy Rifkin. And so I think it's one of the most profound leadership skills I think that we can develop, and you absolutely can teach it and practice it over time.
Just to jump in, because this is something that I love, and, you know, people in my circle, we've been talking about this at length. The reality of it is that empathy is a byproduct of relationship. And so where we have relationship, where there is intimacy, where there is connection and care and conversation. And Kylie, I love what you said, that so much of what is happening right now is that we're starting to have the uncomfortable conversations. But the next step is that we really have to sit and settle in that discomfort. And the reality of it is we're having to develop the muscle and the capability and the discipline to sit through the discomfort. And I think that's where we have a huge opportunity. But at the end of the day, empathy is about relationship. We are starting to see whether that's around diversity, whether it is around the planet, the things that we have chosen and are committed relationship with, we have a different connection. And that connection creates ties, and it creates a desire to be further and deeper in relationship, right? And so it gives you the opportunity to explore and do things you probably would not do, or just to see yourself and become much more self-aware. So totally agree with everything. Love what you said, Yvonne, about the importance of empathy. If we think about children, right? I think that there is a baseline of empathy that we have the opportunity to be exposed to, but it is the responsibility for us to continue to mature and grow that capability over time.
Thank you,
Right.
Oneka. Oneka, I have a question for you, and if you don't mind, Lena or Jen, just to ask about that relationship. And that's something I've always wondered in empathy and relationship. What happens where somewhat of a senior leader or somebody who is at the top or somebody who doesn't have that opportunity to have a relationship with somebody else yet, can they still not show empathy? Because, I think about my prime minister, they may not have a relationship with me. So taking relationship out, we should still be able to show empathy. That would be something that maybe we could even explore offline, but it would be not to take any more time. But I just wanted to maybe add to that I feel that empathy can be demonstrated outside having a relationship, but that's something that we can discuss more, because I'm looking forward to connecting to you some more, Oneka.
That would be awesome, Yvonne.
I might just jump in because I can see, Mustafa, you've got your hand up and a question to ask. So I'll ask you to come off mute. But in the lead up to that, Oneka's just nailed the answer to Gail's question in the chat around what is the emergent capability in change. And for me, it's that sitting in the discomfort, to be able to move through or sit with paradox, to have the really, really difficult conversations. This is where you're going to see leaders really, really excel. So I kind of thought that was great because you've covered off the question on that.
Great.
Mustafa, can you come off mute and hit us with your question? Thanks for coming. Maybe not.
Okay, let's see. There's no more questions in the pipeline while we're waiting for Mustafa. Natasha has a question. So Natasha, please take yourself off mute and welcome.
Hey. Hi, I can't see myself. Hopefully it's okay. I'm from Adelaide. I'm just wondering.
We're having trouble hearing you, Natasha.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me, guys?
You're quite broken up, Mustafa.
Maybe if you pop your questions in chat, I will read them out. Both Natasha and Mustafa were breaking up quite a lot there.
Which is a shame.
Yes.
Like the people who want to ask questions, we can't hear them. There's a metaphor in that.
So feel free to pop your questions in chat. Gail's popped up, another one from Gail. Can you say more about sitting in discomfort? Maybe an example. What's the process? What moves us along, and what's the end goal? What does that look like?
Look, I think we've got a perfect example that happened in the last couple of weeks with Basecamp, the technology company, where the employees were trying to make changes in the space of diversity and inclusion and anti-racism. They called out a number of practices and behaviours that were occurring that in today's world we would not accept. And the leaders were too uncomfortable with those conversations, or more had created a culture where those conversations turn into really violent and aggressive conversations. And that's a perfect example for me of, it's the canary in the mine shaft. We're all going to be facing that kind of situation in the next couple of years. And if you do not have the ability to sit in the discomfort with a conversation around racism within your organization, or gender equality, or some of those social justice topics, then, you know, the impact for Basecamp is they've had 1/3 of their people leave the organization. Last week, we saw, 3 days ago, we saw the Washington Post employees go on strike, and in response to their CEO's op-ed, which was quite disrespectful to employees, and we saw that, you know, they came out and they said there'll be no Washington Post on Monday. So the fact that the leaders have not been able to sit in a space of an uncomfortable conversation has led to these really big consequences. So, you know, the process, I'm going to hand over to Kylie. Do you want to have a bit of this is your ballpark in terms of challenging conversations, to respond to that?
Sure. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about discomfort and what makes a conversation uncomfortable is the biggest thing is about vulnerability in those conversations. And vulnerability is defined as risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And nobody likes to feel discomfort. Nobody likes to be in a situation where there is some risk involved. We don't know how this conversation is going to go. There's uncertainty in the outcome, and there's some level of kind of emotional exposure in that. And, perhaps one of the biggest skills to develop, as we've already said, is our capacity to rumble with the discomfort of those feelings, of the discomfort of risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure in a species who has a bias towards trying to lock everything down, to, have predictability, to have certainty. And, that's probably one of the things that leadership has taught us the most, as the panel has already said. One of the things that can get in the way is our capacity to be able to rumble with the capacity for experiencing, or the potential for experiencing shame in these conversations. That we will potentially say the wrong thing, that we might feel a bit of fear in having those conversations, that we will have that kind of feeling of either not enoughness in being able to see what the change is necessary, or it's going to take time for us to be able to see the path forward. And so one of the things that we talk about is how do we know ourselves enough? And this is kind of to Luc's point. How do we know ourselves enough? How do we have our self-awareness, to be at the front of our mind, to know, well, when I'm in discomfort, how do I respond? Do I try and off-ramp out of the conversation as quickly as possible? Do I try and power over someone? My lights have just gone off. Do I try and power over someone? My eco-friendly lights that go off when I don't move. Do I try and power over someone and, come in as being the knower in that conversation? Or can I sit in the discomfort of maintaining curiosity and asking lots of questions and being open to changing my mind and to learning? And I think, this was, I think it was Oneka's point about the difference between leadership and management. And leadership is the capacity to stay in that arena of curiosity, of asking questions, and of being a learner, and the discomfort that comes with that. And we've got to know ourselves enough as to how do I handle discomfort. Because it's not a natural state that we run towards, and yet it's in that vulnerability where courage sits.
Fantastic. That's a great roundup of vulnerability. Thanks so much for that, Kylie. Hey, we've got the questions now in the chat panel from the people that were breaking up, and in order of appearance in the chat panel, let me read them out. So from Natasha Biggins: regarding the use of this material with our young emerging leaders, is it at the appropriate level, such as teens? Just for a bit of context, Natasha is part of an international student exchange organisation at a volunteer capacity that has folded during the pandemic, and they're looking for new directions.
I don't know is my answer to that, Natasha. I don't have teens around me to test read, so I'm probably going to, if any on the panel or any in the chat who've read it, if that was not the audience it was written to, and yeah, I have no insights into how effective it would be for teens. I'm sorry.
Anyone else have thoughts?
I will actually jump in here, because I am the mother of a new 16-year-old, and it's a lot. But I'll be honest with you, we've been having these transparent conversations because if you think, at least again, I'm sitting here in the United States, there have been a number of topics that have come to the forefront over the last 18 months that have provoked me having serious conversations with my daughter about her race, about gender, about our nation, about violence, about things that feel like they are out of her control, right? And the reality of it is a lot of those things are. And so it has given us the opportunity for me to marry those conversations with what she sees me do every day, right? Whether that's around change or leadership and those things. And one of the first things that I would say is it's not any different than we would for leaders or staff or employees. The first thing that I did was listen. I wanted to understand her perspective and how she was processing the information that was bombarding her, right? Whether that was social media, whether it was her emotions, whether it was anxiety, whether it was the reality of the fact that, you know, she was thinking about a future that was going to be so discreetly different than what she'd already known the first 14 or 15 years of her life. So the reality of it is, if we say that leadership is a capability that can be developed, if we're talking about teenagers, we're talking about the next generational workforce. You know, the sooner we can grab them, the better. We're also looking at a groundswell. If we look at the last year or so, where the activity and the momentum is coming from, provoking catalytic change, it is coming from the new and newest generations that are entering into this world and saying that they are not going to let it continue down the road in the path that it is. And quite honestly, they are quite courageous. And so we have the opportunity, I think, to sharpen and help focus that. And if I go back to the comment, right, Yvonne, around how do we help them do that and have courageous empathy for those around them, I think that we would be doing us a huge service.
Thanks, Oneka, for taking that question on. I hope that was helpful, Natasha, for you. We're going to just take one more question in interest of time. And then after that, if you have any other questions, Jen has got a comment there that we will publish it on a blog and send you the link. So you will still have your questions addressed. But this question is from Mustafa, who we couldn't hear from because of the internet connection. I think this sounds like one for Luc. And it is, what is the view or experience of the panel on leading without authority in the change domain, especially in high power distance cultures or hierarchical organizations? That's got Luc written all over it, I think.
It could be. Well, in high power distance relationships, what I tend to focus on is protocol. Even though it may not seem appropriate when we look at the word protocol and put it next to the word relationship, but yet it has everything to do with leveling status differences in relationships. So what I tend to look at is what language do we need in order for, let's say, for instance, a captain of an airplane to talk to the steward of an airplane, of a surgeon at a table to pass on the right instructions, but also to listen to to the instrumentalist around an operation table. So in those high power distance relationships, which have high stakes in lots of organizations and in lots of countries and governments, what you need there is the development of a language. Now, back to the question and how it has developed or how that has emerged more or was visible more. I think what we see with an increasing virtual connection is that we need more of people, practitioners like ourselves, who are able to pinpoint where there is a lack of language and a lack of interfaces and a lack of connecting soft things, soft tissue, so to speak, to connect this. So to take examples from my practice, I am mostly around leaders who are very smart engineers. I am the dumb person in the room. I continue to acknowledge that I am the dumb person in the room, but I also, from that perspective, can pinpoint to people where they are lacking language to connect to each other. And I do it in a very blunt way, because in my role, it is accepted of me. So I position myself as a go-between, just to bridge that high power distance relationship. So technically speaking, we're talking about role ambiguity, bridging role ambiguity by inserting protocol. Practically speaking, I'm just pretending to be the joker of the group, but I'm doing very technical things into leveling relationships. I hope that answers a little bit of the question, and I hope that was a little bit understandable, although it's a bit relationship technical.
Thanks so much, Luc. Now, we just need to keep in mind 2 minutes to the hour, 1 minute to the hour. Yvonne, did you have something to say very, very quickly?
Yeah, I'm going to make it like 60 seconds or less, but I just wanted to help with that topic because that's something I'm very passionate about. I would say that most of our seek the low-hanging fruits very practically. Leaders want people that they can trust. That's why you will see what you call change agents that are very trusted. They have no authority in the organization or level, but they're always the go-to people in the organizations. They're the ones that make things happen, and they're the movers and shakers. And that's because they've managed to buy into the trust of the leaders. So if you can really buy into a place of trust, where they trust you to do certain things, then they will lean towards you to say, you know what, hey, go meet Mustafa, he can help make that decision. So when I go into organizations, especially as a consultant, I always focus on the low-hanging fruits, things that would help them endear them to me to say that they can trust me to take care of the bigger things within the organization. So that's one of the many strategies that I use when there's a lack of authority and power around me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Just as we close, and we are right on the hour, so let me talk really fast so we can wrap it up. But look, if you already have the book, please leave it a 5-star review on Amazon. If you don't have the book, please see the notes in the chat that I've just popped in there. You could buy a copy for yourself. There's also discounts for a team pack and a group pack. And I feel like if we get more leaders to read this book, we're really going to be able to make a difference and see the rubber hit the ground. Now, in this session, or if the book has given you a thirst for more opportunities to build your confidence and capability, just remember, Jen does Conversations of Change coffee sessions for exec teams and boards, keynote speaking at your offsite, collaboration and communication training through Busting Silos. We have the Agile Change Leadership Institute, where you can do Agile Change Leadership Development and design and delivery of transformational change. Jen, parting words as I raise a glass to congratulate the panel, or you can't see the glass properly, a glass to congratulate the panel and you as the author of this fabulous book. I'll just hand it over to you for parting words.
Thanks, Lena. My parting words are sincere gratitude to all of you for showing up. Sincere gratitude, Lena, for your MC extraordinaire. Sincere gratitude to the panel. I would invite all of you to connect with the panel. They do amazing work. So Kylie has her workshops in having difficult conversations. Oneka is really charging ahead with her work in heart-led leadership in multiple fields. Luc is my personal guru, always at the frontier that I take my cues in terms of where do I need to be looking next. And of course, Yvonne has got a fabulous conference coming up in the next couple of weeks if in your North America. So thank you, everybody. I am incredibly grateful for your support. Have an awesome day or a lovely evening wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone, and Dr. Jen. I hope you found the session valuable. Now go forth and change, leader.